Welcome everyone to this session, which will be led by Professor Ed Kosior, who is one of the leading not only thinkers, but actors in the field of plastics, recycling, and he actually holds some of the most important patents in this area worldwide, and works with governments and large corporations. He builds recycling plants all over the world and has been involved in designing and building what is being called the world's most advanced plastic recycling plant, built on circular principles, which is developing in Bristol, UK right now. He is one of the leading voices long before circular economy became a thing, who has been pioneering in this field. I'm sorry, I'm not reading his bio, but I'm hoping that I've covered a few of the points. But welcome, Ed. It's a real privilege to have you here. And thank you for taking the time to do this presentation with us today, because we see circular economy as one of the high leverage strategic intervention points that lawyers should be looking at in terms of the policies around it, the policy space, how it interacts with particular domains of law and expertise in law. And yeah, welcome. Ed, we're not seeing your screen, and we're not hearing you either.
Okay. So, so can you hear me?
We can hear you.
My screen. Yep. So. So can you hear me, Margaret?
Yep, we can.
But you can, and I'm just trying to see
you, and we can't see your screen.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get that. We had a little bit of a glitch with the Wi-Fi connection, and I'm just going to share my screen. There we go.
Okay.
And it should start to share now. Just tell me when it's sharing.
Yes, we're seeing you.
Okay, I'll just go to full screen mode as well. Just taking a moment. So I'm going to be about economy, and one of the areas that we specialize indeed is in plastics, but my introductory remarks are about the circular direction that the world is going in. And we're in for a new way of thinking and acting. The way in which we've been working actually has not got us ready for the circular economy, not just yet. I'm just waiting for my presentation to show up. It's
interesting, your connection seems to be not doing so well right now.
No, it's not very good. Is it okay now?
We're hearing you clearly, but your picture is frozen.
Yes, I know. My that's my my camera. But if you can hear me, I think that's probably the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And can you see my shared screen?
Yes, we can see your shared screen.
Okay, so my company is NextTech Limited, and we get involved with technology developments around the recycling of plastics. But let me just get into the topic. because that's probably more important. For me. So one of the things that we have to think about now is that the circular economy is all about using what we currently call waste to make new materials. Now, a lot of people are going to be shocked at this because often we don't think of using waste in this sort of way. And we really need to think about this part of it. So whenever you put your things out for recycling, think about doing a really good job, because what we put into that recycling container, and don't call it a bin, is really important, because we're going to use that, hopefully, as a high quality material in its next life. So don't just throw things into that box or bin thinking, well, I'm doing my bit, because you may not necessarily be doing that. And the world is now looking for high quality materials to repurpose as new products. And as I was saying, we are probably the groups blocking the pathway. Now, also, the way that manufacturers and brand owners have made their product basis that we're going to use it once and throw it away. Just think about the way we live and work. This is really the way we've been taught, and this is the way things have been marketed, but they're really designed to be used once and thrown away. And so I really hammer brand owners when I sit and talk to them to say, you really haven't done your job yet, because if we're going to create a circular economy, it's got to be complete, and we can't have all the losses that are built into the whole area. Now, I'm going to talk a bit about how technology can unlock the potential built into materials that have been initially used and then discarded. And we're going to look at what are the best ways of doing that. And the one thing I want everyone to think about is this whole concept of the circular economy actually needs new economic thinking as well, because if we're making taking raw materials and making finished products, whether it be wood or metal or plastics, very often we've been so good at plundering the planet that we are highly efficient at making this a low-cost process. But we haven't developed the efficient techniques of recycling. So it's no surprise that recycled materials that are of high quality can be more expensive than first-use materials. And so in our transition to a circular economy, we actually have to encourage the growth of these materials for them to become more efficient, because it's not necessarily going to happen immediately. And as we know, we have been plundering the planet at the expense, not just of the environment, but of all the species we share the planet with. Now, people are awake to this and want to see change happening. And I'll just make a quick comment about where the planet is going with respect to population and hunger. For many years, the number of hungry and undernourished people was falling. But since about 2015, those numbers have been increasing. And we're now seeing something like 800 million people being undernourished. Now, that's a really big number to think about. And we can see we're heading for a planet with something like 11 billion people by the end of this century. Right now, where we are, we're at just under 8 billion, but that number will grow if things continue as they are. So we have a problem that we have a growing planet, but this slide always frightens the hell out of me, because this slide is showing that right now we have dramatic food waste. Now, so we have food loss and food waste. Food loss is what happens at the farm. And in many places around the world, we lose approximately 1/3 of what we grow. Just think about it. 1/3 of what we grow doesn't make it to people's homes. And then in Europe and North America, we actually waste a lot of food, and that food is then lost. because we buy too much, and we discard it. In sub-Saharan Africa, if you see that little plot in the middle, they lose tiny amounts of food. Once they have it, they don't waste anything. But in Europe and North America, we're very wasteful. And typically we lose food loss, and food waste amounts to something like, in US dollars, $680 billion. And so that's much bigger than in the other countries. We have good technology to preserve food, but we still are not very efficient. Now, all of these things kick on because we have to use many more resources to grow the food. Now, where we've been working in India, trying to address the improvement in farm yields and so on, they lose 40% of their food in the post-harvest situation. Now, that's appalling, because they of all countries need to make their food reach their people in a nutritious way. So they have to use more water, more land, and more fertilizer and more energy to carry out all of this farming. If we can stop food loss, then we don't need to farm as intensively, and we can restore the earth. But this comes to the point about plastics. And my point about food loss is that we know how to preserve food. And one of the reasons why we use plastics in contact with food is to make food last longer. And so if we're going to do that, then we have to make sure that what we do use, the plastics that we do use, are then taken care of and don't get lost. But let me give you a quick map about how plastics are made around the world. Every day we make 1 million tons of plastics. Just think about it, 1 million tons of plastics every day. And where is it made? 20% in Europe, 20% in North America, and 50% is made in Asia. So whatever we do in Europe and whatever North America does is dwarfed by what happens in Asia, in China, the surrounding countries. They are the countries that we have to be interested in and concerned with and have to help to make a circular. And there are a series of blockages to the circular economy. I'm going to bring these up and just make some points about this. First of all, and this applies to the circular economy in general, most materials have been designed to be made and thrown away and then replaced by new materials. And that is something we can avoid and can stop. And there are lots of ways of doing that. In many cases, in the case of plastics, marketeers love all the different bright colors, whether they be pink or white or blue, and so on. Once they make those colors, we can't take those colors out. And so that limits the recyclability of those materials. And they also mix materials together when they make lots of this packaging, and that also makes recycling extremely difficult. And this is a design issue. This is done with intent and purpose. So that means we can actually change that to make it much easier. We also need to take packaging back to food grade, and that's technically quite difficult. And there are lots of regulations that minimize and prevent that from happening. My commentary here is we actually have the technology to do this, but we don't have the regulations permitted. In many countries, even though we have the technology to recycle plastics into food contact, it's against the law. And those laws have been supported by the petrochemical industries that want to see new plastics made all the time. But here's a very worrying statistic. If we do our very best at collection and our very best at sorting and our very best at recycling, we can at best recover 60% of all the materials that we put into the recycling stream, which actually means that this is probably about as good as it gets with our current way of thinking. 60% recovery. That means we still have to generate 40% of our material requirements from virgin materials. And so recycling is not going to be the answer because of these issues with collection, sorting, and recycling. And by the way, these are the optimistic numbers. This is what a sorted bale of plastics looks like. Now, when you put your plastics into a bin, you think, I've done my job, but don't forget, they're all mixed together. And when they go to a sorting center, they get sorted into different categories. Now, this is meant to be a bale of one type of plastic, but you can see in here, there are in fact multiple types, and we can tell by the composition that there are at least 3 or 4 in there, and there are plastic cans as well. And this is after it's been through a sorting center in the United States. That's why it's important that consumers don't throw everything into the recycling bin, because it makes the job of sorting so much more complex. So we all have a role, and so does technology later on. Now, one of the areas that is a area of thin, flexible films, often people call these the soft plastics. And these materials are often made from a wide range of compositions, and they're often pigmented and they're often printed. Each of those issues limits the recyclability of films, and that makes it quite difficult and quite uneconomic to recycle these materials back. And that's why films are often discarded into landfills and then often into rivers and oceans. And this is an area that is attracting a lot of attention, and it requires a lot of effort by governments and people to actually address the area of films. And I can come back to that maybe at the very end. If you're in Britain, and if you look at your milk bottle, the plastic milk bottle, you'll see these are bales of milk bottles all put together with some other plastics. But every milk bottle in Britain has 35% recycled content in those bottles. And that's because the dairy industry said, we actually want to put recycling back into our packaging. And they made this decision over 15 years ago. And they set about developing the know-how and the agreement of all the manufacturers to join them on the journey. So we were very lucky, we came along and we actually developed the technology that each of them are using. So this is used every day in Britain, and it shows us that we can actually close the loop if we really put our minds to this. And this is a product used every day by families right around Britain. Now, here are a couple of images of things that can be done to solve problems. For example, in the top left-hand corner, we've got a whole range of coffee cups. Now, they are a problem, and people say, what do we do about coffee cups? Should we be going to refill? Should we be doing other things? Well, we have actually turned those coffee cups into building materials. And as well, you can see here, this is a cup that's on the market, which is called the R cup, which is actually made from recycled coffee cups and recycled plastics. So what I'm illustrating here is that with innovation, we can turn what looks like waste into a positive, useful material. And down below here are detergent bottles. And if you have a close look, every second bottle is a slightly different color to the one adjacent to it. So there are 2 reds, 2 greens, 2 blues, 2 whites. They are slightly different color because each alternate one has 50% recycled content, and also that we're calling this a low. All of these detergent bottles absorb those aromas and fragrances that are put into detergents. So we had to develop a process that could extract the odor and then put them back into the packaging. So these are on the supermarket shelves right now in Britain and right across Europe. And on the right-hand side, I want to just mention something about black plastics. Black plastics have been used for years and years, but then all of a sudden everyone said, you know what, black plastics aren't recyclable. And the reason was they couldn't be seen by the machines that detected black plastics. And this is a technical issue due to the presence of carbon black. Now, we solved that problem by making the packaging look black, but it could be detected by the machines that were looking at the plastics. And I won't go into the technology, but it meant that all of a sudden that black plastics could be recycled. Now, here is another area where we've made food grade polypropylene from products that look like your butter dish, the trays that are used for chickens, the trays that are used for mushrooms, goods taken from the deli, for example, the olive containers and so on. And we again have the capacity to turn them back into food grade recycled materials. And here are just some illustrations of what happens when you recycle them at different ratios. But the technology is now here, but this is not yet widely done. One of the things that we've been challenged with is how do we tell the difference between a food bottle and a non-food bottle? And for example, if you have a look at in the middle, in the top row, you can see there's a milk bottle and a bleach bottle. They are chemically exactly the same. They're both polyethylene, but how do we know not to use a bleach bottle in an application as a milk bottle? Well, this required us to use some new ideas about how we sort plastics. So we've come up with a fluorescent marker system, which is called PRISM. And you can see in the illustration, some of the labels are actually glowing. And so under ultraviolet light, same sort of black light that you use for banknotes, the labels will actually fluoresce, and they fluoresce at a wavelength, and we can tune in on that wavelength, and then we can select those packages with that fluorescence and then sort them out independently. So this means we can put labels on food packaging and then select food packaging for food grade recycling. And that's been a big step in this area. This is technology which is about to be rolled out in the next few years, in the next year. I have a short video to show you this running. So hopefully this will come over. Whoops. Sorry, looks like I jumped the gun on that one. Sorry. Here we go. I won't try and do too much. So what you're seeing here at this moment is the bottles going up a conveyor where they've been mixed with many other packages, other bottles. And you can see in this case, we've got post-consumer bottles mixed in with the blue and red labels. Now here they are under ultraviolet light. The packages are moving at 3 meters per second, and we have air jets to select the specific packages we want. And so you can see that after that sorting operation, we can separate the packages that we want. So this is sorting using machinery with what we call smart labels with fluorescent markers. And this happens at very high speed. Okay, so this shows you now, here are some packages made from recycled plastics. And the question here is which one is the 100% recycled content and which one is the one made from virgin? Well, the one with virgin is in the middle and the recycled content ones are either side. And the point I'm making here is when we do recycle, we can actually do a very good job, but we do get discoloration. And that's for this particular plastic called PET. And my point about this is we can't expect recycled materials to be exactly like the original. And so I've got a little table here, which is quite technical, but the images on the side here tell the story. So we can see that around here, this is virgin material, and here is 25% recycled content, and then below it, 50% recycled content. So we do have to expect some things to happen during recycling, which will mean recycled materials won't be identical to virgin materials. And here's a table again, which is quite a technical table, but the reason why I put this up is very often companies say, oh, we want to use 100% recycled material. And everyone would like to do that. But what will happen if you use 100% all the time, the material, when it goes through its various cycles, will end up having a greater and greater heat history and then greater changes. So beginning, we should use something like 30% recycled content and at least get the recycling systems going while we get up to the higher recycling rates, and try to avoid the pressure of saying, let's immediately go to the 100% recycled content. Even though that's where we'd like to go, there are some limits. And besides conventional recycling, on the edge of this area, we've got chemical recycling. I won't say too much about chemical recycling because it's a big topic, but this is where big business has to get in and do things. I do want to say something about the bio-based and biodegradable plastics. Now, this is a very interesting graph because it has two axes, and on the right-hand side, we've got biodegradable materials. On the left-hand side, we have non-biodegradable materials. And on the bottom here, we have fossil-based, and on the top, we have bio-based. So only this quadrant here, where they are bio-based and biodegradable, do we actually get materials that are truly degradable. Now, there are many materials on the market where they are bio-based, but not degradable. And there are some degradable plastics that are fossil fuel-based. So it makes it very confusing for consumers to say, I'm making a great choice here, because there is a lot of greenwashing going on, and you do need to be very careful, because many bags that we get offered in groceries and so on say, oh, we're oxo-degradable. Well, these are just plastics that are made to be chemically degradable and turn into microparticles. And so companies are cashing in on this desire to make everything degradable. But just on that topic, here is something that we've made in one of our research projects, where we've made bio-based material and it's compostable. And we're looking at how many days does it take to make this truly compost. And so if you look at this, it's taken nearly 1 year before the material starts to get eaten by bacteria. So we end up having a long time to wait for composting or biodegradation to work. So most biodegradable packaging is going to end up either in landfill or incineration. So think about this when people say, let's go by bio-based materials and not go for the other areas. So here's my last slide.
Okay.
So when we go into this whole area of the circular economy, I'm saying to people, we need to create a very strong stream of materials that are collected and then recycled. That's the big thing. Ocean plastics is something that we need to manage on land, because plastics don't belong in the oceans. And we need to have big, large. So, and I'll stop at that point. There needs to be many more things happening in this area. But the one thing we need is, first of all, the vision to do what we need to do. So as I say here, if we can imagine a solution, then we can do it. Indeed, we must do it. And I think in the circular economy, this is the new place that we need to go to, because we only have one planet and we only have a finite amount of resources to work with and live with. So hopefully that will give some food for thought. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Ed, for that really stimulating presentation. We don't have much time for questions, but I do want to ask you one before we turn to the panel discussion, and we will just maybe only have a 2-minute break in between this and the panel discussion coming up. But I did want to ask you, Ed, if you could point, very quickly, to top areas, governments who want to regulate, to more aggressively facilitate the development of the circular economy, in their jurisdictions. What are a couple of the key issues? I mean, you pointed out the packaging issue on the slides, and the EU has done quite a bit on that. But if a couple areas, policy interventions.
Okay, so most companies want to continue doing business as usual. Their view is they've always worked this way and they want to keep working the old way, lots of them. Some of them actually saying, we want to change and we will put a circular economy as our priority, but they're dragging their feet, they're going slowly. So the way the governments can do it is they can actually incentivize the development of the circular economy. So one way of doing it is you can actually put a tax on non-circular materials. Now, the European government has just done this. They've actually put a cost of 800 euros per tonne on single-use materials that don't have 30% recycled content. Now, that's going to have a massive change. So that's a regulatory thing. And in an ideal world, we'd really want businesses to do this themselves. But in reality, they've been very slow to pick this up. Some have. And I'll tell you the leading company globally that's done it, and that's Coca-Cola. Pepsi, on the other hand, is well behind. And companies like Nestle and Mars, they've only produced 4% recycled content in their packaging. So most of them are around the 5% mark. So they're be careful when you read all these green announcements and look for the statistics. Well, and the statistics are reported by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and you can find out the facts there.
Okay, so basically a tax on non-circular materials is something that governments all over the world could start to implement.
Yes, yeah? Yes, a very simple economic instrument, a bit blunt, but it will work. People will go a long way to avoid paying taxes.
Right, got you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ed, for your contribution today.